Question 1. The investigation demonstrates that a property claims handler, Sarah, has been assigned a claim for a fire at a rental property. Unbeknownst to her supervisor, Sarah is the sister-in-law of the property owner who has lodged the claim. Sarah has begun the process of assessing the damage and has not disclosed her familial relationship to the property owner. Which of the following approaches best upholds the principles of professional conduct and regulatory compliance in this situation? Option A. Sarah should discreetly inform the property owner that she is handling the claim and advise them on how to maximize their payout, given their relationship. Option B. Sarah should immediately disclose her familial relationship to her supervisor and await further instructions on how the claim should be managed. Option C. Sarah should proceed with the claim assessment, but make a note in the file that she is acquainted with the property owner, without specifying the nature of the relationship. Option D. Sarah should continue to handle the claim, assuring herself that her personal relationship will not influence her professional judgment and that she can remain objective. The correct answer is D. Sarah should continue to handle the claim, assuring herself that her personal relationship will not influence her professional judgment and that she can remain objective. Explanation: this scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict of interest that arises when a claims handler has a personal connection to a property involved in a claim. The challenge lies in maintaining impartiality and ensuring that the claims handling process is fair and objective, free from any undue influence or perceived bias. Careful judgment is required to identify and manage such conflicts effectively, upholding the integrity of the claims handling process and the reputation of the insurer. The correct approach involves immediate disclosure of the personal relationship to the insurer's management or compliance department. This proactive step allows the insurer to implement appropriate measures, such as reassigning the claim to another handler or appointing an independent assessor. This approach is ethically sound and aligns with regulatory requirements for transparency and conflict management. It ensures that the claim is handled by an individual who can act without bias, thereby protecting the interests of both the policyholder and the insurer. This aligns with the principles of good faith and fair dealing expected in insurance contracts and regulatory guidance on professional conduct. An incorrect approach would be to proceed with handling the claim without disclosing the personal relationship. This failure to disclose is a direct breach of ethical obligations and potentially regulatory requirements concerning conflicts of interest. It creates a situation where the handler's personal interests could improperly influence their professional judgment, leading to an unfair outcome for the policyholder or the insurer. This undermines trust and can result in disciplinary action, regulatory sanctions, and reputational damage. Another incorrect approach would be to attempt to manage the conflict internally by downplaying the significance of the personal relationship or assuring oneself that it will not affect their judgment. While the intention might be to avoid disruption, this approach still fails to address the fundamental issue of perceived and actual bias. The regulatory framework and ethical guidelines emphasize the importance of avoiding situations that could give rise to a conflict of interest, rather than attempting to self-manage them without external oversight. The appearance of impropriety is as damaging as actual impropriety. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a clear understanding of the insurer's conflict of interest policy and relevant regulatory guidelines. Upon identifying any potential conflict, the immediate step should be to err on the side of caution and disclose the situation. This disclosure should be documented. The handler should then await instructions from their supervisor or compliance department regarding how to proceed. This ensures that the conflict is managed at an appropriate level within the organization, with safeguards in place to maintain objectivity and fairness throughout the claims handling process. Question 2. During the evaluation of a property claim involving suspected mold growth following a water intrusion event, which approach best aligns with regulatory expectations for mold assessment and remediation? Option A. Accepting the policyholder's verbal description of the mold and proceeding with a general contractor's estimate for cleaning based on their experience with water damage. Option B. Denying coverage for mold damage immediately, citing a general policy exclusion for mold, without investigating the cause or extent of the growth. Option C. Relying on the initial water damage restoration company's assessment of the mold and authorizing their proposed remediation steps without further independent verification. Option D. Engaging a certified mold assessor and a qualified remediation specialist to conduct a thorough assessment, determine the extent and cause of the mold, and develop a compliant remediation plan. The correct answer is D. Engaging a certified mold assessor and a qualified remediation specialist to conduct a thorough assessment, determine the extent and cause of the mold, and develop a compliant remediation plan. Explanation: this scenario is professionally challenging because it requires the claims handler to balance the policyholder's need for a safe and habitable living environment with the insurer's obligation to cover legitimate damages, all while adhering to strict regulatory requirements for mold assessment and remediation. The complexity arises from the potential for mold to be a pre-existing condition, a result of gradual deterioration, or a direct consequence of a covered peril, each with different coverage implications. Misjudging the scope of the problem or the appropriate remediation strategy can lead to underpayment, delayed repairs, or even litigation. Careful judgment is required to ensure that the assessment is thorough, the remediation plan is effective and compliant, and the policyholder's interests are protected within the bounds of the policy and regulations. The correct approach involves engaging a qualified, independent mold assessor and remediation specialist. This ensures an objective and expert evaluation of the mold's extent, type, and the underlying cause. The specialist's report will then guide the development of a remediation plan that meets industry standards and regulatory requirements, such as those potentially outlined in state-specific building codes or environmental protection guidelines relevant to property claims handling. This approach prioritizes a scientifically sound and compliant resolution, protecting both the policyholder from health hazards and the insurer from unwarranted claims. It aligns with the ethical duty to act in good faith and the regulatory expectation of competent claims handling. An incorrect approach of relying solely on the policyholder's initial assessment or a contractor's preliminary estimate without independent verification is professionally unacceptable. This fails to meet the standard of due diligence required in claims handling and could lead to inadequate remediation, leaving the policyholder exposed to health risks and potential future damage. It also risks overpaying for unnecessary work if the initial assessment is inflated. Another incorrect approach of proceeding with remediation based on a general contractor's recommendation without specific mold expertise is also professionally unsound. General contractors may not possess the specialized knowledge of mold identification, containment, and safe removal required by environmental regulations and best practices. This can result in ineffective remediation, potential spread of mold, and noncompliance with health and safety standards. Finally, an incorrect approach of denying coverage outright without a thorough assessment of the mold's cause and extent, particularly if it is linked to a covered peril, is a failure to act in good faith. This demonstrates a lack of diligent investigation and could be a violation of regulations requiring fair and timely claims processing. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a systematic approach. First, thoroughly document the initial claim and the reported damage. Second, assess the potential causes of the mold, considering the policy's coverage for the underlying peril. Third, engage qualified, independent experts for assessment and remediation planning, ensuring their credentials and adherence to relevant standards. Fourth, review the expert reports and remediation plans to ensure they are comprehensive, compliant, and cost-effective. Fifth, communicate clearly and promptly with the policyholder throughout the process, explaining the steps being taken and the rationale for decisions. Question 3. The assessment process reveals that a policyholder has an HO3 homeowner's insurance policy. A severe storm has caused damage to the insured's roof, and subsequently, water has entered the home, damaging some personal property. The policyholder reports the claim, stating the roof was damaged by high winds and the water damage to personal property is a direct result of the roof damage. The claims handler needs to determine the appropriate coverage under the HO3 policy for both the roof and the personal property. Which of the following approaches best reflects the correct application of an HO3 policy in this scenario? Option A. Deny coverage for the roof damage because the HO3 policy's personal property section only covers named perils, and therefore, the entire claim is limited by this restriction. Option B. Apply the named perils coverage framework to both the roof damage and the personal property damage, requiring that high winds and water damage be explicitly listed as covered perils for both. Option C. Assume all damage to the dwelling and personal property is covered under the HO3 policy as it is an all-risk policy for all items. Option D. Assess coverage for the roof damage under the all-risk dwelling coverage, verifying that the cause of loss, high winds, is not an excluded peril, and assess coverage for the personal property damage under the named perils section, verifying that water damage from a covered peril is listed. The correct answer is D. Assess coverage for the roof damage under the all-risk dwelling coverage, verifying that the cause of loss, high winds, is not an excluded peril, and assess coverage for the personal property damage under the named perils section, verifying that water damage from a covered peril is listed. Explanation: this scenario is professionally challenging because it requires the claims handler to accurately identify the scope of coverage under a specific homeowner's policy form when faced with a loss that could potentially be interpreted in multiple ways. The challenge lies in applying the precise definitions and exclusions of the chosen policy form to the facts of the loss, ensuring that the policyholder receives the benefits they are entitled to, while also adhering to the insurer's contractual obligations and regulatory requirements. Misinterpreting the policy form can lead to underpayment, disputes, and regulatory scrutiny. The correct approach involves a meticulous review of the specific homeowner's policy form issued to the insured, in this case, an HO3 policy. The HO3 policy provides all-risk coverage for the dwelling and other structures, meaning it covers all perils except those specifically excluded. For personal property, it provides named perils coverage, meaning it only covers losses caused by the perils listed in the policy. Therefore, the claims handler must first determine if the damage to the roof was caused by a covered peril under the all-risk dwelling coverage. If the cause of loss is not an excluded peril, e.g., wear and tear, faulty workmanship, then the damage to the roof is likely covered. Subsequently, if the damage to the personal property is due to a peril listed under the named perils section of the HO3 policy, it would also be covered. This approach aligns with the regulatory expectation that insurers act in good faith and honor the terms of the contract as written, providing coverage for all risks not specifically excluded for the dwelling and for named perils on personal property. An incorrect approach would be to assume that all damage to the dwelling is covered under an HO3 policy without verifying the cause of loss against the policy's exclusions. This fails to acknowledge that even all-risk policies have limitations and exclusions, such as damage from neglect, wear and tear, or faulty workmanship, which are typically not covered. Another incorrect approach would be to apply the named perils coverage of the personal property section to the dwelling damage. This misapplies the policy structure, as the dwelling coverage is distinct from personal property coverage and operates under a different risk basis. A third incorrect approach would be to deny coverage for the personal property damage solely because the cause of loss to the roof is not explicitly listed as a named peril, without considering if the personal property damage itself resulted from a separate, covered named peril. This overlooks the possibility that the personal property damage might be covered even if the roof damage itself is not, or vice versa, depending on the specific cause of each. These incorrect approaches demonstrate a failure to properly interpret and apply the specific terms and conditions of the HO3 policy, potentially leading to unfair claim settlements and violations of consumer protection regulations. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a systematic approach. 1. Identify the specific policy form issued to the insured. 2. Thoroughly understand the coverage provided by that policy form for the dwelling, other structures, and personal property, e.g., all-risk vs. named perils. 3. Investigate the cause of loss for each damaged item. 4. Compare the cause of loss against the policy's exclusions for the dwelling and other structures. 5. Compare the cause of loss against the named perils for personal property. 6. Determine coverage based on the policy's terms and conditions, documenting the rationale clearly. 7. Communicate the coverage decision and its basis to the policyholder in a clear and transparent manner. Question 4. Benchmark analysis indicates that following a severe storm, a policyholder reports the collapse of a detached garage. The policy includes standard coverage for the dwelling and other structures, along with additional coverages for debris removal and for trees, shrubs, and plants. The garage roof sustained significant damage during the storm, and the policyholder believes this damage, combined with heavy rainfall, led to the structural failure. The policyholder also states that several large trees on the property were uprooted by the storm, with some debris from these trees contributing to the garage collapse. The claims handler needs to assess the claim, considering the potential for coverage under the additional coverages. Which approach best reflects a comprehensive risk assessment for this scenario? Option A. Immediately deny coverage for debris removal, as the primary issue is the structural collapse of the garage, and focus only on the cost to repair or replace the garage itself, assuming trees, shrubs, and plants are not covered unless they were the direct cause of the collapse. Option B. Investigate the cause of the garage collapse to determine if it resulted from a covered peril, and if so, assess the policy's debris removal coverage for the cost of clearing the collapsed structure and any related storm debris, while also evaluating the damage to trees, shrubs, and plants for separate coverage based on the storm's impact. Option C. Process the claim for the garage collapse and debris removal without investigating the specific cause of the collapse, assuming the storm is the sole cause, and automatically include coverage for all damaged trees, shrubs, and plants regardless of their proximity to the garage. Option D. Advise the policyholder that coverage for the garage collapse is unlikely due to the complexity of the cause and therefore, any associated debris removal and damage to trees, shrubs, and plants are also not covered, as they are secondary to the primary structural failure. Correct answer is B. Investigate the cause of the garage collapse to determine if it resulted from a covered peril, and if so, assess the policy's debris removal coverage for the cost of clearing the collapsed structure and any related storm debris, while also evaluating the damage to trees, shrubs, and plants for separate coverage based on the storm's impact. Explanation: this scenario is professionally challenging because it requires the claims handler to go beyond a basic assessment of direct property damage and delve into the nuances of additional coverages, specifically focusing on the risk assessment of a collapsed structure. The insurer's obligation extends to covered perils and the policy's specific terms, including those for additional coverages. A thorough risk assessment is crucial to determine if the collapse is a direct result of a covered peril, and if associated costs like debris removal are also covered. The correct approach involves a detailed investigation into the cause of the collapse, cross-referencing this with the policy's peril coverage, and then assessing the applicability of additional coverages like debris removal and potentially trees, shrubs, and plants if they contributed to or were damaged by the collapse. This aligns with the regulatory framework's emphasis on fair and accurate claims handling, ensuring that policyholders receive all benefits to which they are entitled under the contract. Specifically, it adheres to the principle of indemnification, where the insurer aims to restore the insured to their pre-loss financial position within the policy limits and terms. The investigation must be objective and based on evidence to determine the proximate cause of the loss. An incorrect approach would be to automatically deny coverage for debris removal simply because the policy's primary structure coverage might be in question, without first investigating the cause of the collapse. This fails to acknowledge that debris removal is often a separate, albeit related, coverage that may apply even if the primary structure damage is complex or disputed. Another incorrect approach is to assume that any damage to trees, shrubs, and plants is automatically covered under the additional coverage, without establishing a direct link between the collapse and the damage to these items, or without verifying if the peril causing the collapse also damaged the trees, shrubs, and plants. A third incorrect approach is to focus solely on the cost of rebuilding the structure and overlook the costs associated with clearing the site, which are distinct and potentially covered expenses. These approaches fail to conduct a comprehensive risk assessment and may lead to underpayment or denial of valid claims, violating regulatory expectations for thoroughness and fairness. Professionals should adopt a systematic decision-making process. 1. Identify the reported loss and initial policy details. 2. Conduct a thorough investigation into the cause of the loss, gathering all relevant evidence. 3. Determine if the cause of loss is a covered peril under the policy. 4. Assess the applicability of all relevant coverages, including additional coverages, based on the determined cause of loss in policy terms. 5. Communicate findings and coverage decisions clearly and promptly to the policyholder. 6. Quantify covered damages and process the claim accordingly. Question 5. Comparative studies suggest that the interpretation and application of earthquake insurance policies can be a significant challenge for claims handlers following a seismic event. Considering a scenario where a property owner in a seismically active region has filed a claim for extensive damage to their home after a moderate earthquake, which of the following approaches best reflects the professional and regulatory obligations of a claims handler in this jurisdiction? Option A. Immediately assess the visible structural damage and issue a settlement based on the estimated repair costs, applying the standard policy deductible. Option B. Conduct a detailed review of the policy's earthquake coverage, including any specific endorsements, exclusions, and earthquake-specific deductibles, and ensure the damage assessment directly links the loss to the earthquake event before determining the settlement amount. Option C. Process the claim by applying a general peril deductible, as earthquake deductibles are often complex and may not be clearly understood by policyholders, to ensure a faster resolution. Option D. Prioritize claims from policyholders with the highest property values, as these typically represent a larger financial exposure for the insurer, and defer investigation of other claims until resources become available. The correct answer is A. Immediately assess the visible structural damage and issue a settlement based on the estimated repair costs, applying the standard policy deductible. Explanation: this scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires the claims handler to navigate the complexities of earthquake insurance coverage, which often has specific exclusions and limitations, while also adhering to the principles of fair and prompt claims settlement. The challenge lies in accurately interpreting the policy wording in the context of a significant natural disaster and ensuring the policyholder receives the benefits they are entitled to, without overpaying or underpaying the claim. The handler must balance the insurer's financial interests with the policyholder's reasonable expectations and legal rights. The correct approach involves a thorough review of the policy's earthquake coverage, including any endorsements, deductibles, and specific perils covered or excluded. This approach prioritizes a detailed examination of the policy contract and relevant claims handling regulations. It ensures that the assessment of the damage is accurate and directly attributable to the insured peril, and that all policy conditions and exclusions are applied correctly and transparently to the policyholder. This aligns with the regulatory requirement to handle claims fairly, promptly, and in accordance with the terms of the insurance contract. It also upholds the ethical duty to act with integrity and competence. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on the visible structural damage without investigating the cause of loss would be professionally unacceptable. This fails to confirm that the damage was a direct result of the earthquake, potentially leading to an incorrect claim payment if other factors contributed. This violates the principle of accurate loss assessment and could breach regulatory requirements for proper claims investigation. Another incorrect approach that involves applying a standard deductible without verifying if the policy specifies a different earthquake deductible or a percentage-based deductible would also be professionally unacceptable. This could result in an incorrect deduction from the claim payout, potentially underpaying the policyholder and failing to adhere to the specific terms of the earthquake coverage. This demonstrates a lack of diligence in applying policy terms and could lead to a breach of regulatory standards for fair claims settlement. A third incorrect approach that involves delaying the assessment and payment of the claim due to the volume of claims following a widespread event, without making reasonable efforts to expedite the process or communicate effectively with the policyholder, would be professionally unacceptable. This demonstrates a failure to act promptly and diligently, which is a core regulatory and ethical obligation in claims handling, especially following a disaster. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve 1. Immediately acknowledging receipt of the claim and communicating with the policyholder to set expectations. 2. Conducting a thorough review of the policy, paying close attention to any earthquake-specific endorsements, exclusions, and deductibles. 3. Engaging qualified adjusters or engineers to assess the damage and determine its direct cause, ensuring it is attributable to the earthquake. 4. Applying policy terms and conditions consistently and transparently, providing clear explanations to the policyholder regarding coverage, deductibles, and any limitations. 5. Making a fair and prompt settlement offer based on the investigation and policy terms, and documenting all decisions and communications. 6. Adhering to all applicable regulatory requirements for claims handling, including timelines for investigation and payment. Question 6. Governance review demonstrates that a property claim has been submitted for a covered peril. The total assessed covered loss is £50,000. The policy has a £1,000 deductible and a £75,000 limit of liability for this peril. Which approach to calculating the claim settlement best adheres to regulatory requirements and ethical claims handling principles? Option A. Calculate the payable claim by waiving the £1,000 deductible and paying the full £50,000 covered loss. Option B. Calculate the payable claim by subtracting the £1,000 deductible from the £50,000 covered loss, resulting in a settlement of £49,000, which is within the policy limit. Option C. Calculate the payable claim by paying the full £50,000 covered loss without considering the deductible or policy limit. Option D. Calculate the payable claim by subtracting the £1,000 deductible from the £75,000 policy limit, resulting in a settlement of £74,000. The correct answer is D. Calculate the payable claim by subtracting the £1,000 deductible from the £75,000 policy limit, resulting in a settlement of £74,000. Explanation: this scenario is professionally challenging because it requires the claims handler to balance the insurer's contractual obligations with the policyholder's reasonable expectations, all while adhering to strict regulatory requirements regarding policy interpretation and application of limits and deductibles. The core challenge lies in ensuring that the policyholder receives the full benefit of their coverage up to the stated limits after the deductible is applied, without misrepresenting the policy terms or engaging in unfair claims handling practices. Correct approach involves accurately calculating the payable claim amount by first identifying the total covered loss, then subtracting the applicable deductible, and finally ensuring the resulting amount does not exceed the policy's stated limit of liability for the covered peril. This approach is ethically sound and regulatorily compliant because it upholds the principle of good faith and fair dealing, ensuring the policyholder is not unfairly deprived of their coverage. Specifically, it aligns with regulatory expectations that insurers will interpret policy terms in a reasonable and favorable manner for the policyholder where ambiguity exists, and that all claims payments accurately reflect the policy's terms and conditions, including the correct application of deductibles and adherence to limits. An incorrect approach that involves applying the deductible to the policy limit before calculating the covered loss is ethically and regulatorily flawed. This misinterprets the policy structure, effectively reducing the coverage available to the policyholder beyond what the contract stipulates. It can be considered a misrepresentation of policy benefits and may lead to an unfair denial or underpayment of a claim, violating principles of fair claims handling and potentially breaching regulatory statutes designed to protect consumers. Another incorrect approach that involves waiving the deductible without proper authorization or justification, even with the intention of goodwill, is also problematic. While seemingly beneficial to the policyholder, this action can set a precedent, create inconsistencies in claims handling, and potentially expose the insurer to financial risk if not properly documented and approved. It bypasses established policy terms and internal controls, which can lead to regulatory scrutiny for inconsistent application of policy conditions and potentially improper financial management. A further incorrect approach that involves paying the full amount of the covered loss without considering the deductible or policy limit, regardless of the loss amount, is fundamentally incorrect. This fails to adhere to the core contractual agreement between the insurer and the policyholder. It ignores the agreed-upon risk-sharing mechanism, the deductible, and the insurer's defined exposure, the policy limit, leading to potential overpayments and financial mismanagement. This directly contravenes the policy terms and regulatory requirements for accurate claims settlement. A professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a thorough review of the policy wording, specifically the sections detailing coverage, limits, and deductibles. The claims handler must then accurately assess the extent of the covered loss. The next step is to apply the deductible as defined in the policy to the covered loss. Finally, the payable amount is determined by ensuring it does not exceed the policy limit. Throughout this process, maintaining clear communication with the policyholder about the claim status and the basis for the settlement is crucial, ensuring transparency and adherence to good faith principles. Question 7. Investigation of a property claim following a severe hailstorm, where the policyholder reports extensive roof damage and interior water ingress, requires the claims handler to adopt a best practice approach. Which of the following best represents this approach? Option A. Advise the policyholder that hail damage is often excluded or subject to significant deductibles, and suggest they pursue a claim with their homeowners association instead. Option B. Conduct a detailed inspection of the roof and interior, documenting all damage with photographic evidence, comparing findings against the policy's coverage terms, and communicating a clear plan of action to the policyholder. Option C. Proceed with the claim settlement based on industry average repair costs for similar storm damage without a specific site inspection, to ensure a consistent and efficient payout. Option D. Immediately authorize a full roof replacement and interior repairs based on the policyholder's description to expedite the process and ensure customer satisfaction. The correct answer is D. Immediately authorize a full roof replacement and interior repairs based on the policyholder's description to expedite the process and ensure customer satisfaction. Explanation: investigation of a property claim following a significant storm presents a professionally challenging scenario due to the potential for widespread damage, the emotional distress of policyholders, and the need to balance fair claims settlement with adherence to policy terms and regulatory requirements. The adjuster must navigate these complexities with integrity and efficiency. The correct approach involves a thorough, objective, and timely investigation, adhering strictly to the policy wording and relevant regulatory guidelines. This includes documenting all damage meticulously, obtaining necessary evidence, and communicating clearly and empathetically with the policyholder. The adjuster must act in good faith, avoiding undue delay and making decisions based on factual findings and policy provisions. This aligns with the regulatory framework's emphasis on fair claims handling practices, promptness, and transparency, ensuring the policyholder receives their entitled benefits without unnecessary hurdles. An incorrect approach would be to rely solely on the policyholder's initial verbal description of damage without independent verification. This fails to meet the duty of thorough investigation and could lead to an inaccurate assessment, potentially resulting in an underpayment or overpayment of the claim, both of which are regulatory failures. Another incorrect approach is to delay the investigation and settlement process unreasonably, citing workload or administrative issues without proper justification. This violates the regulatory requirement for prompt claims handling and can cause significant hardship to the policyholder, constituting a breach of good faith. Finally, an approach that prioritizes minimizing the payout over a fair assessment of the damage, perhaps by selectively ignoring certain damage elements or misinterpreting policy clauses to the policyholder's detriment, is a clear ethical and regulatory failure, undermining the principle of indemnity. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes a systematic and evidence-based approach. This involves understanding the policy contract thoroughly, conducting a comprehensive site inspection, gathering all relevant documentation, consulting with experts when necessary, and communicating findings and decisions clearly to the policyholder, always within the bounds of regulatory compliance and ethical conduct. Question 8. Strategic planning requires a claims handler to anticipate potential issues that may arise during the claims process. In a scenario where a property insurance policy contains a co-insurance clause, and the insured has experienced a significant loss, what is the most appropriate course of action for the claims handler when it appears the insured has substantially underinsured their property relative to the policy's co-insurance requirement? Option A. Waive the co-insurance penalty to maintain a positive relationship with the policyholder, assuming the loss is significant enough to warrant goodwill. Option B. Calculate the co-insurance penalty based on the policy terms and the loss, and clearly explain to the policyholder how this impacts their settlement, providing the basis for the calculation. Option C. Advise the policyholder to increase their property coverage significantly for future policies to avoid similar penalties. Option D. Inform the policyholder that a co-insurance penalty applies but refrain from explaining the calculation or its specific impact on their settlement, as this is a complex matter. Correct answer is B. Calculate the co-insurance penalty based on the policy terms and the loss, and clearly explain to the policyholder how this impacts their settlement, providing the basis for the calculation. Explanation: this scenario is professionally challenging because it requires the claims handler to navigate a situation where a policyholder has significantly underinsured their property, leading to a potential co-insurance penalty. The challenge lies in applying the co-insurance clause correctly and communicating the implications to the policyholder in a clear empathetic, and compliant manner, without overstepping the bounds of their role or providing financial advice. The claims handler must balance the insurer's contractual obligations with the policyholder's understanding and potential financial hardship. The correct approach involves accurately calculating the co-insurance penalty based on the policy terms and the loss amount, and then clearly explaining to the policyholder how the penalty affects their settlement. This approach is justified by the regulatory framework, which mandates fair and transparent claims handling. Specifically, it aligns with principles of good faith and fair dealing, ensuring the policyholder is informed about the application of policy conditions. The claims handler's duty is to apply the policy as written, and in doing so, to explain the consequences of its provisions, including co-insurance. An incorrect approach would be to waive the co-insurance penalty without proper authorization or a valid contractual basis. This is a regulatory failure because it deviates from the terms of the insurance contract, potentially exposing the insurer to undue risk and setting a precedent for future claims. It also fails to uphold the principle of equitable treatment of all policyholders, as others would be subject to the penalty. Ethically, it could be seen as a form of preferential treatment without justification. Another incorrect approach would be to simply inform the policyholder that they have a co-insurance penalty without explaining how it was calculated or what it means for their claim. This is a failure in communication and transparency, which are key regulatory expectations in claims handling. The policyholder has a right to understand how their settlement is determined. Failing to provide this explanation can lead to disputes and a perception of unfairness. A third incorrect approach would be to advise the policyholder on how to adjust their insurance coverage for future policies. This is a regulatory and ethical boundary issue. Claims handlers are not licensed financial advisors, and providing such advice could be construed as offering services outside their scope of authority, potentially leading to liability for the insurer if the advice proves detrimental. The focus must remain on the current claim and the application of the existing policy. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve 1. Thoroughly reviewing the policy wording, particularly the co-insurance clause and any applicable endorsements. 2. Accurately calculating the loss and the potential co-insurance penalty according to the policy terms. 3. Preparing a clear and concise explanation of the co-insurance clause and its application to the current claim using plain language. 4. Communicating the findings and the settlement offer to the policyholder, ensuring they understand the implications of the co-insurance penalty. 5. Documenting all communications and calculations meticulously. 6. Escalating to a supervisor or underwriter if there are any ambiguities in the policy, or if the situation warrants a deviation from standard procedure, ensuring proper authorization is obtained. Question 9. Stakeholder feedback indicates that some property claims handlers are struggling to consistently apply the necessary and reasonable standard for coverage D, loss of use expenses. Specifically, when a policyholder is displaced due to a covered peril, what is the best practice for determining the appropriate level of temporary accommodation and associated living expenses? Option A. Offer a range of temporary accommodation options that meet the policyholder's stated needs and budget, allowing them to select the most suitable choice and reimburse reasonable additional living expenses incurred due to the displacement. Option B. Provide only the most basic and cost-effective temporary accommodation available in the area, irrespective of the policyholder's pre-loss standard of living or specific family needs. Option C. Require the policyholder to secure their own temporary accommodation and submit all receipts for reimbursement after the claim is fully settled, to ensure all expenses are verified. Option D. Automatically approve the policyholder's preferred accommodation choice, regardless of cost, as long as it is within the overall loss of use policy limit. The correct answer is A. Offer a range of temporary accommodation options that meet the policyholder's stated needs and budget, allowing them to select the most suitable choice and reimburse reasonable additional living expenses incurred due to the displacement. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires the claims handler to balance the policyholder's immediate need for temporary accommodation with the insurer's obligation to pay only for covered losses as defined by the policy and relevant regulations. The core difficulty lies in interpreting necessary and reasonable expenses for loss of use coverage, ensuring that the chosen accommodation aligns with the policy's intent and avoids unnecessary inflation of the claim. Careful judgment is required to prevent both underpayment, which could lead to policyholder dissatisfaction and potential regulatory scrutiny, and overpayment, which impacts the insurer's financial stability and could be seen as a breach of fiduciary duty. The correct approach involves thoroughly investigating the policyholder's circumstances to understand their actual needs and the local market conditions for temporary housing. This includes verifying the extent of the damage necessitating the displacement, assessing the policyholder's family size and any specific needs, e.g., pets, accessibility, and researching comparable rental rates in the area for similar accommodations. The insurer must then offer a solution that is both necessary for the policyholder to maintain a normal standard of living and reasonable in cost, aligning with the policy's Coverage D provisions. This aligns with the principles of fair claims handling, ensuring the policyholder is made whole without undue enrichment, and adheres to regulatory expectations for prompt, fair, and equitable settlement of covered claims. An incorrect approach would be to automatically approve the most expensive option presented by the policyholder without due diligence. This fails to uphold the insurer's responsibility to manage claim costs prudently and could be seen as a failure to act in good faith, potentially violating regulatory requirements for fair claims practices. Another incorrect approach would be to offer only the most basic and least desirable accommodation, regardless of the policyholder's reasonable needs or the local market. This could be interpreted as a failure to adequately indemnify the policyholder for their loss of use, leading to dissatisfaction and potential disputes, and may contravene regulations requiring fair and equitable treatment of policyholders. Finally, delaying the provision of suitable temporary accommodation while awaiting extensive documentation beyond what is reasonably necessary for initial assessment would also be an incorrect approach, as it fails to meet the spirit of loss of use coverage, which is intended to address immediate displacement. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes a thorough understanding of the policy contract, a diligent investigation of the loss circumstances, and an objective assessment of the policyholder's needs against market realities. This involves clear communication with the policyholder, transparent explanation of coverage limitations and requirements, and a commitment to finding a mutually agreeable and compliant solution. The process should be guided by the principles of good faith, fairness, and adherence to all applicable regulatory standards for claims handling. Question 10. The review process indicates that a commercial property insurance policyholder has submitted a claim following a fire that has rendered their manufacturing facility inoperable for an estimated 6 months. The policy includes coverage for material damage and business interruption. The claims handler has received initial estimates for the cost of repairs and projections for lost profits from the policyholder's consultant. The handler is considering how to proceed with assessing and settling this complex claim. Which of the following approaches best aligns with regulatory expectations for handling such a commercial property claim? Option A. Conduct a thorough investigation into the cause and extent of the fire damage, independently verify the repair cost estimates, and critically assess the business interruption projections based on historical performance and market conditions, while communicating progress and any information requirements to the policyholder. Option B. Offer a significantly reduced settlement for both material damage and business interruption, based on a quick review of the submitted documents, to close the claim file efficiently and avoid further administrative burden. Option C. Deny the business interruption portion of the claim outright, citing the policy's exclusion for consequential losses, without further investigation into the specific circumstances of the interruption. Option D. Immediately approve the full repair cost estimate and the projected lost profits, as presented by the policyholder's consultant, to expedite the settlement and minimize disruption to the policyholder's business. The correct answer is D. Immediately approve the full repair cost estimate and the projected lost profits, as presented by the policyholder's consultant, to expedite the settlement and minimize disruption to the policyholder's business. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires the claims handler to balance the insurer's contractual obligations with the policyholder's reasonable expectations, all while adhering to specific regulatory requirements for commercial property claims. The complexity arises from interpreting the policy wording in the context of a significant business interruption, potentially impacting the policyholder's livelihood and requiring a prompt, fair, and compliant claims resolution. Careful judgment is needed to avoid underpayment, overpayment, or undue delay, any of which could lead to regulatory scrutiny or legal action. The correct approach involves a thorough investigation of the cause of loss, a precise interpretation of the commercial property policy's terms and conditions, including the business interruption coverage, and a fair assessment of the resulting financial losses. This approach prioritizes adherence to the policy contract and relevant regulatory guidelines, such as those governing fair claims handling practices and the prompt settlement of valid claims. It ensures that the policyholder receives the indemnity they are entitled to under the policy, fostering trust and maintaining the insurer's reputation. An incorrect approach of immediately denying coverage based on a preliminary assessment without a full investigation would fail to uphold the duty of good faith and fair dealing, potentially breaching regulatory requirements for thorough claims handling. This could lead to allegations of unfair claims settlement practices. Another incorrect approach of offering a settlement that is demonstrably less than the policyholder's actual losses, even if it appears to be a quick resolution, would be unethical and likely violate regulations prohibiting underpayment of claims. This demonstrates a failure to accurately assess the loss and provide the full indemnity due. A further incorrect approach of delaying the claims process excessively without valid justification, perhaps due to internal inefficiencies or a lack of resources, would contravene regulatory expectations for prompt claims handling. Such delays can cause significant hardship to the policyholder and may result in penalties. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve 1. A comprehensive understanding of the policy terms and conditions. 2. A diligent and objective investigation into the cause and extent of the loss. 3. A fair and accurate assessment of the claim based on the policy and evidence. 4. Clear and timely communication with the policyholder. 5. Strict adherence to all applicable regulatory frameworks and ethical principles governing insurance claims. Question 11. Operational review demonstrates that a property claim has been filed following a significant storm event. The claims handler has received initial damage assessments and is tasked with developing a repair cost estimate. Which of the following approaches best aligns with regulatory requirements for fair claims handling and the principle of indemnity? Option A. Develop a detailed, itemized repair estimate using industry-standard estimating software, cross-referencing local labor and material costs, and ensuring the scope aligns with policy coverage. Option B. Adjust the estimated repair costs based on the perceived financial stability of the policyholder to ensure a fair outcome. Option C. Apply a preset average repair cost for similar storm damage claims in the region without a detailed site-specific assessment. Option D. Accept the initial repair estimate provided by the policyholder's contractor without independent verification or comparison to industry benchmarks. The correct answer is A. Develop a detailed, itemized repair estimate using industry-standard estimating software, cross-referencing local labor and material costs, and ensuring the scope aligns with policy coverage. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires the claims handler to balance the insurer's need for cost control with the policyholder's right to be indemnified for their loss. The core of the challenge lies in accurately estimating repair costs, which directly impacts the settlement amount. The use of estimating software like Xactimate or Mitchell is standard practice, but the interpretation and application of the data generated by these tools are critical. The claims handler must ensure the estimate is fair, reasonable, and compliant with policy terms and regulatory requirements, avoiding both underpayment and overpayment. The correct approach involves utilizing the estimating software as a tool to generate a detailed, itemized estimate based on current market labor and material rates for the specific geographic area. This estimate should then be reviewed for accuracy, completeness, and adherence to the policy's scope of coverage. The justification for this approach lies in its alignment with the principle of indemnity, ensuring the policyholder is placed in the same financial position they were in before the loss, without profit. Regulatory frameworks, such as those governing fair claims handling practices, mandate that insurers make a good faith effort to settle claims promptly and fairly. Using industry-standard software and verifying its output against actual conditions and policy terms is the most robust method to achieve this, demonstrating due diligence and a commitment to fair dealing. An incorrect approach would be to solely rely on a predetermined or standard repair cost for similar losses without a detailed, site-specific estimate. This fails to account for the unique variables of each claim, such as the extent of damage, specific materials used in the property, and local market fluctuations. This approach risks underpaying the policyholder, violating the principle of indemnity and potentially breaching fair claims handling regulations that require individualized assessment. Another incorrect approach would be to accept the first estimate provided by a contractor without independent verification or comparison against industry standards. While contractor estimates are valuable, they can sometimes be inflated or may not fully align with the insurer's established pricing guidelines or the specific policy coverage. This can lead to overpayment and potentially violate the insurer's internal controls and regulatory obligations to manage claims costs prudently. A further incorrect approach would be to adjust the estimate based on subjective factors or personal biases rather than objective data and policy terms. This introduces an element of unfairness and can be seen as a failure to act in good faith. Regulatory bodies often scrutinize claims handling for evidence of bias or arbitrary decision-making, and such an approach would be highly susceptible to criticism and potential penalties. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a systematic review of the damage, the use of appropriate estimating tools to generate a detailed and accurate cost breakdown, verification of the estimate against policy provisions and market data, and open communication with the policyholder and their chosen contractors. The focus should always be on achieving a fair and compliant settlement based on objective evidence and established industry practices. Question 12. Assessment of the claims handler's actions in response to a policyholder's report of significant basement flooding due to a hurricane, where the policyholder states that water entered through foundation cracks and also seeped in under the garage door, and requests immediate payment to begin repairs. Option A. Conduct a thorough inspection of the property to document all flood-related damages. Review the SFIP to confirm coverage for damages from both foundation cracks and seepage under the garage door, and then communicate the findings and coverage determination to the policyholder. Option B. Deny coverage for any damage related to seepage under the garage door, as flood insurance primarily covers direct inundation from rising waters. Option C. Issue an immediate payment based on the policyholder's verbal description of the damage to expedite repairs, as the policyholder is clearly distressed. Option D. Advise the policyholder that mold remediation is not covered under the SFIP, regardless of the cause or timing of its development, and refuse to discuss any potential coverage for it. The correct answer is A. Conduct a thorough inspection of the property to document all flood-related damages, review the SFIP to confirm coverage for damages from both foundation cracks and seepage under the garage door, and then communicate the findings and coverage determination to the policyholder. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires the claims handler to navigate the complexities of the National Flood Insurance Program, NFIP, regulations, while ensuring fair and accurate claim handling for a policyholder who has experienced significant property damage. The handler must balance the policyholder's need for prompt assistance with the strict requirements of the NFIP, which are designed to prevent fraud and ensure the program's solvency. Misinterpreting or misapplying these regulations can lead to underpayment, claim denial, or even regulatory penalties. The correct approach involves a thorough review of the policyholder's flood insurance policy, a detailed inspection of the damaged property to document the extent of the loss, and a meticulous application of the NFIP coverage provisions and limitations. This includes understanding what is covered e.g., direct physical loss caused by or evidenced by a flood, what is excluded e.g., damage from mold unless it directly results from a flood event, and the specific requirements for proof of loss and mitigation. The handler must communicate clearly and transparently with the policyholder, explaining the coverage, the claims process, and any documentation required. This approach aligns with the ethical duty to act with integrity and competence, and the regulatory requirement to handle claims in accordance with NFIP guidelines and the Standard Flood Insurance Policy, SFIP. An incorrect approach would be to make an initial payment based solely on the policyholder's verbal description of the damage, without conducting a proper inspection. This fails to verify the extent of the loss and could lead to an overpayment, which is a violation of the NFIP financial stewardship principles and could be considered a breach of fiduciary duty. Another incorrect approach would be to deny coverage for damage that is clearly a direct result of the flood, such as water damage to flooring and lower walls, simply because the policyholder did not immediately remove wet materials. The SFIP typically allows a reasonable time for mitigation, and denying coverage without considering this would be a violation of the policy terms and potentially bad faith. Finally, an incorrect approach would be to provide the policyholder with incomplete or misleading information about their coverage options or the claims process, which erodes trust and can lead to frustration and further disputes, and is contrary to the regulatory expectation of fair and honest communication. Professionals should approach such situations by first grounding themselves in the specific terms and conditions of the SFIP and relevant NFIP regulations. They should then follow a systematic process, verify coverage, conduct a thorough and objective damage assessment, accurately apply policy provisions to the documented damage, and communicate all decisions and requirements clearly and professionally to the policyholder. This structured approach ensures compliance, fairness, and efficient claim resolution. Question 13. Upon reviewing a property claim where a burst pipe in an unoccupied property led to significant water damage, and subsequently, due to the prolonged absence of the policyholder and lack of ventilation, a secondary issue of mold growth developed throughout the affected areas, which approach best reflects the principle of proximate cause analysis under UK insurance law and CISI guidelines. Option A. Focus solely on the mold growth as the most recent and visible damage, considering it the proximate cause of the claim. Option B. Deny the claim entirely as mold growth is typically an excluded peril, regardless of its origin from a burst pipe. Option C. Determine if the burst pipe and insured peril was the dominant and efficient cause of the entire loss, including the mold growth, or if the mold growth, potentially an excluded peril, became the proximate cause due to the policyholder's inaction. Option D. Apportion the claim payout based on the estimated damage caused by the water from the burst pipe versus the damage caused by the mold growth. The correct answer is C. Determine if the burst pipe and insured peril was the dominant and efficient cause of the entire loss, including the mold growth, or if the mold growth, potentially an excluded peril, became the proximate cause due to the policyholder's inaction. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires the claims handler to distinguish between an insured peril and an excluded peril when both have contributed to the loss. The core of the challenge lies in applying the principle of proximate cause, which dictates that the dominant or efficient cause of the loss is what determines coverage, not merely the last event in a chain of causation. Misinterpreting proximate cause can lead to incorrect claim denials or payouts, impacting both the insurer's financial stability and the policyholder's trust. Careful judgment is required to meticulously examine the sequence of events, the nature of each contributing factor, and the policy wording to ascertain the true proximate cause. The correct approach involves a thorough investigation to identify the dominant and efficient cause of the loss. This means determining which event, in the chain of causation, was the primary or most significant factor leading to the damage. If the proximate cause is an insured peril, the claim should be paid, even if an excluded peril played a secondary role. Conversely, if the proximate cause is an excluded peril, the claim should be denied, regardless of any contributing insured perils. This approach aligns with the fundamental principles of insurance contracts and regulatory expectations that claims be handled fairly and in accordance with policy terms. Specifically, under UK regulations and CISI guidelines, insurers have a duty to act with integrity and to ensure that claims are settled fairly and promptly, based on a proper assessment of the facts and the policy. This necessitates a deep dive into proximate cause analysis to avoid arbitrary decisions. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on the last event in the chain of causation, without considering its relationship to prior events, is flawed. This fails to acknowledge that the last event might be a consequence of an earlier, more significant cause. For example, if a storm-insured peril causes a roof to leak, and subsequently, due to the leak mold, potentially excluded peril develops, the proximate cause of the mold damage is the storm, not the mold itself. Ignoring this chain and focusing only on the mold would be a regulatory failure. Another incorrect approach is to consider all contributing factors as equally responsible, leading to a pro rata apportionment of blame or coverage. While some policies may allow for apportionment in specific circumstances, the principle of proximate cause generally seeks a single dominant cause. Applying apportionment without clear policy wording, or a situation where multiple independent causes are truly concurrent and equally efficient, would be a misapplication of the principle and could lead to unfair outcomes, potentially breaching the duty of fair dealing expected of insurers. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a structured approach. 1. Gather all relevant facts and evidence, including witness statements, expert reports, and photographic evidence. 2. Carefully review the insurance policy wording, paying close attention to definitions of insured perils, excluded perils, and any clauses related to concurrent causation or apportionment. 3. Construct a clear timeline of events leading to the loss. 4. Analyze each event in the timeline to determine its nature, insured or excluded peril, and its causal relationship to subsequent events. 5. Apply the principle of proximate cause to identify the dominant and efficient cause of the loss. This may involve considering whether one event set in motion a chain of events that led directly to the loss, without being broken by an independent intervening cause. 6. Consult with legal or technical experts if the causation is complex or ambiguous. 7. Document the entire decision-making process, including the rationale for determining the proximate cause and the subsequent coverage decision. Question 14. The evaluation methodology shows that when multiple insurance policies are in place covering the same property against the same peril, and a claim arises, the claims handler must determine the correct method for allocating the payout. Which of the following best describes the appropriate approach to ensure fair and compliant settlement? Option A. The claim is divided equally among all insurers identified as having cover for the loss, irrespective of their respective sums insured. Option B. The claims handler identifies all policies providing indemnity for the same loss, determines the sum insured under each policy at the time of the loss, and then applies the principle of proportionate contribution to ensure each insurer contributes according to their liability. Option C. The insured is advised to pursue the claim against the policy with the highest sum insured, and the other insurers are not involved in the initial settlement. Option D. The insurer first to be notified pays the full claim to the insured, and then seeks recovery from other insurers if they deem it appropriate. Correct answer is D. The insurer first to be notified pays the full claim to the insured, and then seeks recovery from other insurers if they deem it appropriate. Explanation. The evaluation methodology shows that understanding the principles of contribution is crucial for fair and compliant property claims handling. This scenario is professionally challenging because it involves multiple insurance policies covering the same risk, requiring the claims handler to navigate complex legal and contractual obligations to ensure no policyholder is unfairly disadvantaged or overcompensated. The core challenge lies in applying the principle of contribution equitably, respecting the terms of each policy and relevant legislation to prevent unjust enrichment. The correct approach involves meticulously identifying all policies that provide indemnity for the same loss, determining the respective sums insured under each policy at the time of the loss, and then applying the principle of proportionate contribution. This ensures that each insurer contributes to the claim in proportion to their respective liability, as dictated by the principle of indemnity and common law principles of contribution, which are foundational to insurance regulation. This approach upholds the regulatory requirement for fair claims handling and prevents the insured from recovering more than their actual loss from multiple insurers. An incorrect approach that involves paying the full claim to the insured from the first policy presented, regardless of other cover, fails to acknowledge the existence of other contributing policies. This directly contravenes the principle of indemnity, as the insured could potentially recover the full loss from multiple sources, leading to unjust enrichment. It also breaches the duty of utmost good faith owed to all parties, including other insurers, by failing to involve them in the claims settlement process. Another incorrect approach, which is to arbitrarily divide the claim equally between all identified insurers without regard to their respective sums insured, ignores the established legal framework for contribution. This method does not reflect the proportionate liability of each insurer and can lead to under- or over-contribution by individual insurers, potentially creating disputes and failing to meet regulatory expectations for accurate and fair claims settlement. A further incorrect approach, which is to delay settlement indefinitely while attempting to negotiate a settlement between insurers without a clear framework, is professionally unacceptable. While cooperation between insurers is encouraged, undue delay in settling a valid claim is a breach of regulatory requirements for timely claims handling and can cause significant hardship to the policyholder. The professional decision-making process should involve a systematic review of all relevant policies, a clear understanding of the policy terms and conditions, and the application of established legal principles of contribution, supported by clear documentation and communication with all parties involved. Question 15. Performance analysis shows that a significant number of property claims are experiencing delays due to initial documentation issues. An insured submits a claim form for fire damage to their home. The claim form itself is largely complete, detailing the event and the extent of the damage. However, it is missing a detailed inventory of damaged items, which is a standard requirement for assessing the full value of the loss. The policy wording also references the need for supporting documentation to substantiate the claim. Based on the regulatory framework for property claims handling in this jurisdiction, what is the most appropriate immediate action for the claims handler? Option A. Accept the claim form as submitted and proceed with the assessment, assuming the insured will provide the inventory later. Option B. Request a comprehensive list of all possible documents related to property ownership and maintenance, in addition to the inventory, to ensure thoroughness. Option C. Reject the claim immediately due to the missing inventory, informing the insured that a complete submission is required. Option D. Request the insured to provide the detailed inventory of damaged items as soon as possible, explaining its necessity for a full assessment, while acknowledging receipt of the initial claim form. Correct answer is A. Accept the claim form as submitted and proceed with the assessment, assuming the insured will provide the inventory later. Explanation. This scenario presents a common challenge in property claims handling, balancing the need for efficient claim processing with the absolute requirement to obtain all necessary documentation as stipulated by regulatory frameworks. The professional challenge lies in identifying the precise documentation required by the relevant jurisdiction's laws and guidelines, and ensuring that the insured provides it without undue delay or burden, while also avoiding the rejection of a valid claim due to minor omissions that can be rectified. The correct approach involves a thorough understanding of the specific claim form requirements and supporting documentation mandated by the property claims handling regulations for this exam's jurisdiction. This means meticulously reviewing the policy wording, the applicable statutes, and any relevant industry guidelines to determine the exact information and evidence needed to assess the claim's validity and quantum. This approach ensures compliance with regulatory obligations, promotes fair treatment of the insured, and establishes a clear, defensible record for the claim. An incorrect approach would be to accept a claim form that is clearly incomplete and lacks essential supporting documentation without requesting the missing items. This fails to adhere to the regulatory requirement for proper substantiation of claims, potentially leading to an inaccurate assessment and payment, and exposing the insurer to regulatory scrutiny for non-compliance. Another incorrect approach is to reject a claim outright solely because the initial claim form submission is missing a minor, non-critical piece of documentation, especially if the insured has otherwise provided sufficient information to establish the loss. This demonstrates a lack of professional judgment and a failure to apply the principle of proportionality, potentially violating the duty of good faith and fair dealing owed to the policyholder. A further incorrect approach is to request an excessive and unreasonable amount of documentation that goes beyond what is legally or contractually required. This can unduly burden the insured, cause unnecessary delays, and may be viewed as an attempt to obstruct the claim process, leading to reputational damage and potential regulatory sanctions. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve 1. Identifying the specific regulatory framework governing property claims handling for the jurisdiction. 2. Consulting the policy wording to understand the contractual obligations regarding claim notification and documentation. 3. Determining the minimum essential documentation required to initiate a claim assessment under the relevant regulations. 4. Communicating clearly and promptly with the insured about the required documentation, specifying what is missing and why it is needed. 5. Assessing the materiality of any missing documentation and considering whether the claim can proceed with a commitment to provide the outstanding items. 6. Maintaining a clear and organized record of all communications and documentation received. Question 16. Implementation of a claims handling process for a property insurance policy where the insured reports significant water damage to their basement, stating it began gradually over several weeks due to a slow leak from an external pipe, but has now resulted in extensive mold growth and structural issues. What is the most appropriate initial step for the claims handler to take to determine coverage? Option A. Immediately deny the claim, citing the gradual nature of the reported leak and potential exclusions for wear and tear or lack of maintenance. Option B. Advise the insured to undertake immediate repairs to mitigate further damage and then await a detailed invoice for reimbursement. Option C. Conduct a thorough investigation to ascertain the precise cause and origin of the water damage, reviewing policy definitions, exclusions, and gathering all relevant evidence. Option D. Issue payment for the full reported damage, assuming all water damage is covered under the policy's comprehensive perils. The correct answer is A. Immediately deny the claim, citing the gradual nature of the reported leak and potential exclusions for wear and tear or lack of maintenance. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires the claims handler to navigate the complexities of water damage coverage, which often involves distinguishing between sudden and accidental events and gradual deterioration, a common point of contention in property insurance. The handler must apply the policy's specific wording and relevant regulatory guidance to determine if the damage is a covered peril. Misinterpreting the policy or regulations can lead to underpayment, denial of valid claims, or overpayment, all of which have significant financial and reputational consequences. The correct approach involves a thorough investigation to ascertain the cause and origin of the water damage. This includes reviewing the policy wording, specifically definitions of perils, accidental damage, and any exclusions related to gradual damage, wear and tear, or lack of maintenance. The handler must then gather evidence, such as the insured statement, expert reports, e.g., from a plumber or restoration specialist, and photographic evidence to establish whether the damage resulted from a covered event as defined by the policy and relevant regulations. This meticulous, evidence-based approach ensures compliance with the policy contract and regulatory obligations to handle claims fairly and promptly. An incorrect approach would be to automatically deny the claim based on a presumption of gradual damage without a proper investigation. This fails to uphold the duty of good faith and fair dealing owed to the policyholder, and may violate regulatory requirements that mandate a thorough and impartial investigation of all claims. Another incorrect approach is to assume coverage for all water damage without scrutinizing the policy's specific terms and exclusions, which could lead to paying for damage that is explicitly excluded, such as that caused by poor maintenance or natural seepage over time. This demonstrates a lack of due diligence and adherence to the policy contract. A third incorrect approach is to rely solely on the insured's initial statement without independent verification or expert assessment, potentially leading to an inaccurate coverage determination. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes a systematic and objective investigation. This framework involves 1. Understanding the policy contract thoroughly, including all definitions and exclusions. 2. Gathering all relevant facts and evidence from multiple sources. 3. Applying the policy terms and regulatory requirements to the established facts. 4. Documenting all findings and decisions meticulously. 5. Communicating clearly and transparently with the policyholder throughout the process. This structured approach ensures that coverage decisions are fair, compliant, and defensible. Question 17. Which approach would be most appropriate for a property claims handler when assessing a claim for damage to a detached garage that the insured uses for storing personal vehicles, and also rents out a small portion of it to a local artist for studio space, generating a modest monthly income? Under a standard homeowner's insurance policy with coverage B, other structures defined as other structures on the premises used and not rented or held for rental to others. Option A. Apply the coverage A dwelling limit to the damaged garage, assuming it is an extension of the main dwelling. Option B. Deny the claim entirely as the structure is rented out, thus disqualifying it from coverage B. Option C. Advise the insured that coverage B only applies to structures used exclusively for personal enjoyment, and that any rental income voids coverage. Option D. Investigate the primary use of the structure and the extent of the rental activity to determine if the rental is incidental to the insured's use and enjoyment of the residential premises, and if the policy's definition of other structures is met. The correct answer is B. Deny the claim entirely as the structure is rented out, thus disqualifying it from coverage B. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires the claims handler to accurately interpret policy language, specifically the definition and application of other structures under coverage B, and to apply this interpretation to a factual situation involving a detached building that serves a dual purpose. The challenge lies in distinguishing between a structure that is solely for use and enjoyment of the residential premises and one that might have a commercial or rental component, which could affect coverage. Careful judgment is required to avoid underinsuring the property or improperly denying a claim. The correct approach involves a thorough review of the policy's definition of other structures and any endorsements or exclusions that might apply. It necessitates gathering all relevant facts about the detached building, including its primary use, any secondary uses, and whether it is rented or intended for rental. If the building is primarily used for the insured's residential enjoyment, even if it has a minor incidental use that generates a small amount of income, it would likely fall under coverage B. This approach aligns with the principle of interpreting insurance policies in favor of the insured when ambiguity exists, and it adheres to the regulatory requirement to handle claims fairly and promptly based on the policy terms. An incorrect approach would be to automatically deny coverage simply because the structure is detached and generates some income, without a detailed analysis of the policy's specific wording and the primary purpose of the structure. This fails to consider that use and enjoyment of the residential premises can encompass a broad range of structures that enhance the insured's lifestyle, even if they have a minor income-generating aspect. Another incorrect approach would be to assume that any income generation disqualifies the structure from coverage B without verifying if the policy explicitly excludes structures used for business or rental purposes, or if such use is incidental. This could lead to a wrongful denial of a valid claim. A further incorrect approach would be to apply the coverage A dwelling limits to the other structure, without confirming that the policy allows for such an extension or if the other structure's coverage is a separate limit. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve 1. Understanding the policy contract thoroughly, paying close attention to definitions and limitations. 2. Investigating all relevant facts objectively. 3. Applying the policy terms to the facts in a manner that is fair to the insured and compliant with regulations. 4. Documenting the decision-making process and the rationale behind it. 5. Seeking clarification from underwriting or legal counsel if policy interpretation is complex or uncertain. Question 18. The analysis reveals that a property insurance claim has been filed due to water damage originating from a burst pipe in a second-floor bathroom. The claims handler arrives at the property and observes visible water staining on the ceiling of the first-floor living room directly below the bathroom. Which of the following documentation approaches best aligns with best practices for property claims handling? Option A. Documenting the visible water staining on the first-floor ceiling with a brief note stating water damage observed, and proceeding to estimate the cost of repainting the ceiling. Option B. Relying on the policyholder's verbal description of the damage and assuming the extent of the problem is limited to the visible ceiling stain. Option C. Immediately approving a settlement based on the visible ceiling stain, without further investigation or documentation. To expedite the claim process, Option D. Taking detailed photographs and videos of the water staining on the first-floor ceiling, noting the exact location and size of the stain, and also inspecting and documenting any potential water intrusion or damage in the bathroom itself, including the burst pipe and surrounding areas, and any signs of moisture in wall cavities or subflooring on the first floor. The correct answer is A. Documenting the visible water staining on the first-floor ceiling with a brief note stating water damage observed, and proceeding to estimate the cost of repainting the ceiling. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because accurately documenting water damage is crucial for fair and efficient claims handling, directly impacting the policyholder's settlement and the insurer's financial exposure. Misjudging the extent or cause of damage can lead to underpayment, disputes, or overpayment, all of which have regulatory and ethical implications. The core challenge lies in balancing thoroughness with efficiency, ensuring all relevant information is captured without unnecessary delay or expense. The correct approach involves a systematic and detailed recording of all observable aspects of the water damage. This includes noting the source of the water, e.g., burst pipe, external flooding, sewage backup, the affected areas and materials, the extent of saturation, and any signs of secondary damage like mold or structural compromise. Photographic and video evidence, dated and time-stamped, is paramount. Detailed notes should describe the conditions observed, the actions taken e.g., water extraction, drying, and any initial assessments of the cause and damage. This comprehensive documentation serves as the factual basis for claim assessment, negotiation, and potential dispute resolution, aligning with the regulatory expectation of claims being handled promptly, fairly, and with due diligence. It also upholds ethical obligations to the policyholder by ensuring their claim is properly understood and addressed. An incorrect approach that relies solely on a brief, general description of the damage without specific details or visual evidence fails to meet the standard of due diligence. This can lead to an incomplete understanding of the loss, potentially resulting in an inadequate settlement for the policyholder and a breach of the insurer's duty to act in good faith. Another incorrect approach that focuses only on visible surface damage while ignoring potential hidden issues, such as water seeping into wall cavities or subflooring, is also professionally unacceptable. This oversight can lead to future problems for the policyholder and represent a failure to fully assess the scope of the loss, potentially violating regulatory requirements for thorough claims investigation. A third incorrect approach that prioritizes speed over accuracy by making assumptions about the cause or extent of damage without proper investigation and documentation is equally problematic. This can result in arbitrary decisions that do not reflect the actual loss incurred, leading to unfair outcomes and potential regulatory scrutiny. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a structured approach. First, clearly identify the reported cause of loss. Second, conduct a thorough on-site inspection, systematically documenting all affected areas and materials. Third, utilize a combination of detailed written notes and visual evidence, photos, videos to capture the full scope of the damage. Fourth, consider potential secondary damage and consult with specialists if necessary. Finally, ensure all documentation is clear, objective, and readily accessible for review and assessment. This methodical process ensures that claims are handled with the necessary rigor and fairness. Question 19. Cost-benefit analysis shows that while immediate, in-depth investigation is resource-intensive, a prompt acknowledgement of a property loss notification is crucial for customer satisfaction and regulatory compliance. An insurer receives notification of a significant property damage event from a policyholder. Which of the following actions best reflects the immediate, post-notification response required by regulatory frameworks and professional claims handling standards? Option A. Immediately issue a coverage denial based on the initial description of the loss, stating that the policy likely does not cover such events. Option B. Send a generic acknowledgement form that requires the policyholder to provide extensive documentation before any further action is taken. Option C. Delay acknowledgement until an initial assessment of the damage can be made by a loss adjuster to determine the potential claim value. Option D. Acknowledge receipt of the notification within the regulatory timeframe, confirm the policy is in force, and provide clear information on the next steps in the claims process, including contact details for the assigned claims handler. The correct answer is D. Acknowledge receipt of the notification within the regulatory timeframe, confirm the policy is in force, and provide clear information on the next steps in the claims process, including contact details for the assigned claims handler. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the insurer's need for timely information to assess risk and manage potential costs against the policyholder's right to prompt acknowledgement and clear communication following a loss. The speed of initial response can significantly impact the policyholder's perception of service and the insurer's ability to mitigate further damage. Regulatory frameworks often mandate specific timeframes for acknowledgments to ensure fair treatment of customers. The correct approach involves acknowledging the loss notification promptly and clearly outlining the next steps in the claims process. This demonstrates adherence to regulatory requirements for timely communication and sets appropriate expectations for the policyholder. It also allows the insurer to begin its assessment and potentially offer immediate advice or assistance, which can be crucial in property claims to prevent further loss. This aligns with the principles of good faith and fair dealing expected of insurers. An incorrect approach that delays acknowledgement or provides vague information fails to meet regulatory obligations for prompt communication. This can lead to policyholder frustration, potential disputes, and a perception of poor service, which can have reputational and financial consequences. It also misses the opportunity to gather crucial initial details that could aid in a more efficient and accurate claims assessment. Another incorrect approach that immediately assigns blame or makes definitive coverage decisions without a proper investigation is also professionally unacceptable. This prejudges the claim and can prejudice the policyholder, violating principles of fairness and due process. Insurers have a duty to investigate claims thoroughly and impartially before making coverage determinations. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve prioritizing regulatory compliance regarding communication timelines, understanding the policyholder's immediate needs and concerns, and initiating a structured claims handling process that is both efficient and fair. This includes documenting all communications and actions taken. Question 20. The performance metrics show a consistent pattern of claims handlers overlooking specific endorsements when assessing property damage claims following a severe hailstorm. One particular endorsement, coverage for cosmetic surface damage, is frequently applied to policies covering high-value vehicles. A recent claim involved a vehicle with several minor dents on its exterior panels, which were clearly caused by hail but did not affect the vehicle's structural integrity or operational functionality. The claims handler, focusing solely on the base policy's exclusion for cosmetic damage unless it affects functionality, denied the claim. However, the policy in question explicitly included the coverage for cosmetic surface damage endorsement. Which of the following approaches best reflects the correct handling of this claim, considering the endorsement? Option A. The claims handler was correct to deny the claim, as the base policy's exclusion for cosmetic damage, unless it affects functionality, is a standard clause that overrides any specific endorsements. Option B. The claims handler should have immediately referred the claim to a senior underwriter for a complete policy rewrite before making any coverage determination. Option C. The claims handler should have assumed the endorsement was a standard administrative addition and proceeded with the base policy's terms, as endorsements are typically minor adjustments. Option D. The claims handler should have assessed the claim based on the specific wording of the coverage for cosmetic surface damage endorsement, which modifies the base policy's exclusion for cosmetic damage and likely provides coverage for the hail-induced dents, even if they do not affect functionality. The correct answer is D. The claims handler should have assessed the claim based on the specific wording of the coverage for cosmetic surface damage endorsement, which modifies the base policy's exclusion for cosmetic damage and likely provides coverage for the hail-induced dents, even if they do not affect functionality. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires the claims handler to navigate the interplay between a standard property insurance policy and specific endorsements that modify its coverage. The core difficulty lies in accurately interpreting the scope and limitations of the endorsements and applying them correctly to the claim, ensuring that the policyholder receives the coverage they are entitled to, while also adhering to the insurer's contractual obligations and regulatory requirements. Misinterpretation can lead to underpayment, disputes, and potential regulatory sanctions. The correct approach involves a meticulous review of all relevant policy documents, including the base policy and any attached endorsements. The claims handler must then apply the specific terms and conditions of the endorsements to the facts of the loss. This ensures that the claim is assessed and settled in accordance with the agreed-upon coverage modifications. This approach is ethically sound and regulatorily compliant because it upholds the principle of utmost good faith by accurately reflecting the contractual agreement between the insurer and the insured. It aligns with the regulatory expectation that insurers will handle claims fairly and transparently, paying what is contractually due. An incorrect approach would be to disregard the endorsement and apply only the terms of the base policy. This fails to acknowledge the contractual modifications agreed upon by the parties and could result in the denial of coverage that was specifically purchased. This is a regulatory failure, as it breaches the duty to pay claims in accordance with the policy terms and conditions, potentially leading to unfair treatment of the policyholder. Another incorrect approach would be to interpret the endorsement in a manner that is overly restrictive or ambiguous, thereby limiting coverage beyond its intended scope. This can be seen as a misrepresentation of coverage and a failure to act with integrity. Ethically, it undermines the trust placed in the insurer by the policyholder. A further incorrect approach would be to assume the endorsement is standard and apply a generic interpretation without consulting the specific wording. Endorsements can vary significantly, and a one-size-fits-all approach ignores the unique contractual provisions that define the coverage. This demonstrates a lack of due diligence and can lead to incorrect claim settlements, violating regulatory requirements for accurate claims handling. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a systematic review of all policy documents, a thorough understanding of the specific wording of any endorsements, consultation with underwriting or legal departments if ambiguity exists, and clear communication with the policyholder regarding the coverage as modified by endorsements.